organizational meeting to order. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is time for public participation during the regular meeting. Mrs. Petter, would you do the roll call?
Mr. Simons?
Present.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Here.
Mrs. Moore?
Here.
Mrs. Kessler?
Here.
Mrs. Weider?
Here. Next is the nomination and election of the president.
I move to elect Susan Weider as president of the Princeton School Board of Education.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded, and thank you both. Mrs. Petter, would you call the roll?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Weider?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Thank you.
You ready?
And I hope it's okay. I brought my favorite attorney.
Would you like him to give you those?
Yes, please.
Sure. Oath of office, President. I
I, Susan Elizabeth Weider,
do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties as President of the Board of Education of Princeton City School District.
and I will faithfully discharge my duties
As President
as President
of the Board of
of
Education
the Board of Education
of Princeton City School District,
of the Princeton City School District,
Hamilton County, Ohio,
Hamilton County, Ohio,
to the best of my ability
to the best of my ability,
and in accordance with the laws
and in accordance with the laws
now in effect
now in effect
and hereafter to be enacted.
and hereafter to be enacted.
In my continuance in said office
My continuance in said office
and until my successor is chosen and qualified.
and until my successor is chosen and qualified.
There you go. Is that PDA? Is that PDA?
That is PDA. You gonna call it? No PDA? Do we have that in our policies?
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
I'm just, John.
Thank you. Next is nomination and election of the vice president.
I move to elect John Simons as vice president of the Princeton City School Board of Education.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Weider?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Now, oath of office.
Your turn, John.
He's not kissing.
Well,
He's not
Chris can
present?
kiss it.
He's not kissing.
Oh, God.
If he doesn't, then Chris can.
Equal opportunity here. Why not?
Do you want me to finish? Sure. Come on.
That was sexist.
Yeah, well, I mean, if he needs a PDA.
John, that was sexist. You don't say that.
I know.
Step up.
Can John step down?
No. No, absolutely not.
What?
He might fall.
Oh, yeah.
I state your name.
I, John Myron Simons,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties
as Vice President of the Board of Education
as Vice President of the Board of Education
of Princeton City School District,
of the Princeton City School District,
Hamilton County, Ohio,
Hamilton County, Ohio,
to the best of my ability
to the best of my ability
and in accordance with the laws
and in accordance with the laws
now in effect
now in effect
and hereafter to be enacted
and hereafter to be enacted
during my continuance in said office
during my continuance in said office
and until my successor is chosen and qualified.
and until my successor is chosen and qualified. All right.
You didn't get your kids?
Married that long.
Oh, that's cold. That's not fair.
Thank you. Next is approval of resolution approving standing authorizations for the treasurer of the Princeton City School District to enable the treasurer to carry out necessary district duties for the calendar year 2023.
I move to approve that resolution approving the standing authorizations for the treasurer of the Princeton City School District to enable the treasurer to carry out necessary district duties for calendar year 2023 as presented.
Second.
Go ahead, Mary.
Second.
Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of resolution approving standing authorization for the superintendent of the Princeton City School District to enable the superintendent to carry out necessary district duties for the calendar year 2023.
I move to approve the resolution approving standing authorizations for the superintendent of the Princeton City School District to enable the superintendent to carry out necessary district duties for calendar year 2023 as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of the resolution, we need to go down. It's approval of the resolution waiver of reading minutes.
I move to approve the waiver of reading minutes from previous meetings in accordance with section 3313-26 ORC and existing district policy.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes. Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of resolution authorizing treasurer to file a modified tax budget for 2024 and 2025.
I move to approve the resolution authorizing the treasurer of the Princeton City School District to file a modified tax budget for 2024-2025 fiscal year.
Second.
Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is the appointment of Ohio School Boards Association Legislative Liaison.
I move that on the OSBA Legislative Liaison, that Gina Ruffin-Moore be appointed as Princeton's Legislative Liaison to the Ohio School Boards Association at the 2023 Princeton Board of Education organizational meeting and serving until the 2024 organizational meeting. And Jody Winter Kessler as the alternate.
Second. Is that okay with you two ladies? I guess
Yes, thank
before
you.
we just,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Mrs. Better?
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Motion passes. Next is the appointment of the Student Achievement Liaison for 2023.
Tax
Tax
abatement.
Oh, I'm
Tax
sorry.
abatement.
I checked that one off. Tax Abatement Liaison for 2023.
Did we talk about this one? I don't even know, do we have anybody?
We had
Who do
last
we
year.
have? Who do we have?
Who did it?
You and I.
Okay, well then, let's do the same. I mean, I can't remember. Okay, so, I mean, we can still do the same.
Okay. Make the motion.
I mean, either.
Mary and
I
Okay.
move that Mary Cleveland be appointed as Princeton's tax abatement liaison at the 2023 Princeton Board of Education organizational meeting until the 2024 organizational meeting with John Simon serving as alternate. Is that the way you want?
Mhm.
Yes.
What happened?
I. Wait a second.
Second.
Oh, my goodness.
Waterworks.
Sewer Department.
Susan, it's on you.
So, Gina has been appointed as the Student Achievement for
need
the
to-
tax.
we
We
need
need to go to the
Call the roll.
I was gonna have a call.
Ready?
Trustee-
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons.
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mrs. Moore.
Yes.
Motion passes. And Student Achievement. Next is, the appointment of the Student Achievement Liaison for 2023.
Who did that last year?
You?
I thought it was, yeah.
Oh, that'd
Who
be
was the
me.
alternate?
Huh?
Was it Jody?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay, I move that Gina Ruffin Moore be appointed as Princeton Student Achievement Liaison to the Ohio School Boards Association at the 2023 Princeton, Board of Education organizational meeting, and serve until the 2024 organizational meeting with Jody Kessler as the alternate.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mrs. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is the approval of OSBA membership for 2023.
I move that membership in the OSBA for 2023 be approved.
I'll second. It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Abstain.
Mrs. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder.
Yes. Thank you. Next is approval of Ohio Education Policy Institute 2023 membership.
I move to approve membership of the Ohio Education Policy Institute effective January 2023 through December 2023.
I'll second. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mrs. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons.
Yes.
Motion passes. Next is approval of the OSBA 2023 Legal Assistance Fund.
I move that membership in the OSBA Legal Assistance Fund at a cost of $250 per year, for year 2023 be approved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Abstain.
Thank you. Next is approval of the Board Service Fund budget for 2023.
I move to approve the Board Service Fund Budget 2023, setting aside the sum of, I believe it was $20,000 for the 2023 Board Service Fund.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mrs. Moore.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of legal services for 2023. I'll move that we approve that.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded. Did you want to say something?
Well, Ennis Britton and Dinsmore and Shoal
All right.
will
Maybe
be
we
the
need to
board's
say
legal
that.
counsel for 2023.
I'll second it again.
Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Thank you, motion passes. Next is the approval of set time, dates, and locations of Board of Education meetings in 2023.
Sewer District.
Must be me again. I don't understand why that's,
Is that you?
yeah, apparently,
It's all Princeton.
but something's wrong. Sorry, I switched services.
Okay. Approval of set time, dates, and locations of Board of Education meetings for 2023. Anybody?
I move that Board of Education meetings for calendar year 2023 be approved as presented.
Second.
We have one date that had one month that had multiple dates on it, and that was April. I think a couple board members,
So we had April
April.
3rd, 10th, or 17th. The 3rd is during spring break. 10th is that Monday that we're off, Easter Monday. So it's the 17th, we don't want to interfere with any breaks. So we have 17th and then 24th.
So we're
So you're
asking about the 17th, using that.
And the 24th.
It's not my way.
I'm sorry.
It's not my way.
17th is-
17 and 24.
So is that good for everyone?
So you're saying remove those days?
17th?
That's fine.
We're picking the 17th out of those 3 days.
okay?
Wait,
Got it?
Keeping the
What are we doing?
24th?
I'm picking April 17th and the 24th.
we're meeting on those days.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes. Okay, at this time, I move that we adjourn from the organizational meeting.
The time is
Second.
6:33.
Thank
I
you,
second.
6:33. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Thank you, motion passed.
It's now 33. What time do we start up?
Straight in.
Straight in. There you go.
Well, you gotta let it file in, right? You should let it file in. Is that correct, Madam President?
Oh, look at that.
That's what I said.
Speaking of filing in.
No, it's for recognition. They just stayed outside because.
Isn't there something from,
Yeah, we got an inspirational message and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, inspirational message is going to be a video, but Dave Maxon's going to introduce it, and then we have a couple different.
Call the regular meeting to order. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is a time for public participation during the regular meeting. Mrs. Petter, would you call the roll?
Mrs. Wyder?
Here.
Mr. Simons?
Here.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Here.
Mrs. Moore?
Here.
Mrs. Kessler?
Here. Thank you. We'll all now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is approval and revision of the regular agenda.
I move to approve the regular agenda as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes. Thank you. Next is the inspirational message from the Princeton Community Middle School.
Thank you, President Wyder. I'm going to call Dr. Dave Maxim up to the podium. While he's coming up here, the theme, hashtag PCMS family, certainly means a lot. As I was mentioning to our cabinet the other day, I was over break, I was walking through the middle school, high school, and the different schools, just doing a quick little kind of walkabout, if you will. No matter where you go, all throughout the middle school, you see hashtag PCMS family. When you see Twitter, Instagram, it's hashtag PCMS family. It's something that Dave Maxim is very proud of. Dr. Maxim?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Burton. Thanks to the Board of Education for giving me the opportunity to speak, and to you, Mr. Burton. Everybody knows when you give me an opportunity, I'm going to tell you how great our school is and how much I believe in our students. So what I'm going to give you is I'm going to give you an introduction into something that I tell our students, and there's been a consistent theme that I mentioned during our announcements and something that we believe. And then I'm going to have the video roll, and then I'll summarize some of the things at the end. So what you're going to hear is you're going to hear the students and our staff talk about what this means to them. So I usually end 95% of our announcements with this. At PCMS, we respect and celebrate our differences here at school. At no time should anyone make fun of someone for being different. Everyone has a unique strength or contribution that they can make to our school. We are a very diverse hashtag PCMS family where you are a special person, no matter the differences in skin color, religion, economic background, language, LGBTQ plus identity, or nationality. We come together every day as Vikings. Love yourself enough to set boundaries. You teach people how to treat you by deciding what you will and you won't accept. You have the right to protect your mind, peace, and body. I believe in each and every one of you, have high expectations for everyone, and love you all. Roll the beautiful bean footage. Let's go.
Roll that beautiful bean.
We respect and celebrate each other's differences at school. We don't make fun of people for being different.
Everyone has the unique strength and contribution that they make to our school. matters.
Kindness matters.
La gentillesse compte.
Kindness matters.
Kindness matters.
Kindness matters. Say bueno.
Kindness matters.
We have the right to protect our mind, peace, and body.
Our teachers believe in each and every one of us. Have high expectations for everyone. And love each other.
I love my PCMS family because I make the best friends here.
This is Dr. Maxim. I just want to tell everyone with hashtag PCMS family. What that means to me is that we're all together, all for one. No matter our differences, we come together every day as brothers and love on each other. So have a great day. Hashtag PCMS family.
My PCMS, hashtag PCMS family means to me is that they are all kind, respectful, and loving to each other.
I am Laura Robin, the sixth grade principal of PCMS, and the thing that makes me proudest of the hashtag PCMS family is when I see our kids take care of each other.
I love my PCMS family because they're helpful.
Hi, I'm James Stallworth. I'm a seventh grade principal here at PCMS. I can say that I love my hashtag PCMS family because we have each other's backs no matter what subject we teach, no matter what grade level we have, across all the different content areas. We support one another and make sure that the students are first and their learning is paramount.
My PCMS family is cool and amazing. It is someone always having your back. People are good and kind.
Hi, I'm Debbie Amodio, 8th grade principal, associate principal. I love my PCMS family because this is the hardest working group of people I've ever had the honor to work with. Go Bucks.
I love my hashtag PCMS family.
We are proud to be Vikings.
Go Vikes!
Go Vikes! Go Vikes!
Go Vikes!
Go Vikes!
Go Vikes! Go Vikes! Go Vikes!
So obviously, the kids and the staff do a lot better job of illustrating that than anything I could say. So I just want to wrap it up and just say that the opportunity, what I get to see, what you see in that video, is what I have the privilege to see every day. I see those faces all day long, and that's what I see. Kids love coming to school. Our teachers love loving on them. Our staff loves on them, because that's what we're about. So anyway, I want to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to be here at Princeton and to work and to serve our community. Thank you, guys.
And thank you for all you do. Next is recognition of Steve Brooks, 2022 Southwest District Soccer Coaches Association Assistant Coach of the Year.
Thank you, Mrs. Wider. I just have a few comments, and we'll call up Mr. Brooks. Give him a really nice plaque here, and take a picture with the Board of Education, with the treasurer and myself. But Coach Brooks was awarded the 2022 Boys Division I Public School Assistant Coach of the Year, selected by the coaches of Southwest District. This was a special recognition given to Southwest Ohio High School Soccer Coaches Association. Coach Brooks has been with Princeton since 2018, serving as a varsity assistant coach. Coach Brooks has been coaching youth organizations since, sorry, Coach, 1988. He's been a long time. He coached Springdale Recreation Soccer and basketball. Is very involved in the club soccer circuit. Coach Brooks' son Landon is a senior on our soccer team, proud dad and coach, had the opportunity to coach Landon throughout his entire high school career. And Coach, we have here the pamphlet from the senior all-star game, as well as a nice plaque. Let's give a big round of applause, Coach Steve Brooks.
That's my son. You can Next is recognition of the Princeton Music Boosters, proclaiming February 11th, 2023 as Princeton Music Booster Day.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to call up our Department Chair, Kristen Brown, here in a minute. But first, I have a resolution here, and then I have a few comments following, and then, Kristen, I'll call you up here. This is a proclamation from the Board of Education. Whereas during the 1957-58 school year, 9 men and 9 women joined together to underwrite the purchase of the first set of band uniforms, totaling $9,000 for the newly formed Princeton Marching Band. This purchase equates to just under $100,000 today. Whereas in 1962, the Princeton Music Boosters started its private music lesson scholarship program by offering 2 scholarships. Through their tireless effort, the Boosters now award 27 such private lesson opportunities, plus up to 2 scholarships for college music majors totaling over $15,000 annually. And whereas the dedicated parents of Princeton Music Boosters have utilized a variety of means to raise funds to achieve its goal of furthering Princeton's music education, including but not limited to the sale of fruitcakes, Christmas trees, chicken dinners, spiritware, and operating concession stands at football games. And whereas the Princeton Music Boosters given hundreds of thousands of dollars back to Princeton schools through its hard work to help ensure the legacy of the Princeton music continues to thrive for many years to come. And whereas the Princeton Music Boosters have been locally and nationally recognized for their innovative programs to support our young musicians. Initiatives such as these, such as their use of social media, their private music lesson scholarship programs, its recruiting efforts, and the Joan Meyer scholarships for graduates of Princeton that have chosen to major in music. And whereas throughout its incredible 65 years of service to Princeton City Schools, the Music Boosters are as focused on their mission now as they were in 1957. They continue to work in collaboration with Princeton City School District to further enhance, uphold, and create traditions within the music program, as well as to help ensure any child who wishes to play music gets that opportunity. Now, therefore, let it be resolved that Saturday, February 11th, 2023, shall be known as Princeton Music Boosters Day throughout the Princeton City School District. Let's give them a huge round of applause. And as Kristen walks up, my quick comments are these. The moving here 8 years ago, we knew that our youngest, Tommy, had yet found his way what he wanted to do. And one of the very first groups that threw their arms around him was the music. And so I've seen very firsthand as a parent, very proud parent in the music program, and the fact, a little known story, I see Kyle Phillips back there too, who was really instrumental with Tommy's love of the saxophone. But I will tell you that he would have never taken private lessons. Never. Not a million years. We would not, as parents, have been able to convince him to do it. If it wasn't for that music scholarship. And that was such a huge moment, actually, as he very embarrassingly got called up and walked throughout the chairs. Mr. Phillips, you'll remember that. And he got that award. So on behalf of the Board of Education, as superintendent, but in this moment as a father of a former band geek, thank you so much, Christian Brown.
So our Princeton Music Boosters have been outstanding for 65 years, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I've been witness to it for 33 of those 65 years. When I student taught here back in 1990, and then eventually came back to the district. So we've already talked about all the wonderful things that they've done, but it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Brian Stevens, who is the OMEA president-elect, to make an announcement.
Thank you so much, and Mr. Burton and members of the board, thank you for giving up time to allow me to speak here tonight. While we were waiting in the hallway, we made a connection. I taught band and choir for 33 years before my recent retirement and this new job, and we were talking about Leslie Schultz, who teaches orchestra in the district and music technology, was a student of mine back in the day in high school.
And so there's always a connection when it comes to music. As Kristen said, my name is Brian Stevens. I'm the president-elect of the Ohio Music Education Association. Each year, OMEA awards an Outstanding Support Group Award to a deserving booster group who has been nominated by an OMEA member and has demonstrated strong support for music education in their school and community. I'm pleased to announce that OMEA's Outstanding Music Support Group for 2023 is the Princeton Music Boosters. And I'm rehashing some things that you just said, but according to Kristen, of course, the private lesson scholarship program is unique, and what a wonderful gift that is to the district and the students. Dedicating $7,000 to bring in outside clinicians, outside experts for jazz, band, orchestra, choir, band camp, drill team, and Messiah soloists, and soliciting specific scholarship donations to increase scholarship funds, such as naming a private lesson scholarship as the Dr. Robert Monroe Scholarship, who was the AE chair when I started judging back in the day, so I remember Bob very well, to recognize and remember former music educators, as well as the Christopher Dyer Scholarship to remember a fallen Viking. So Ms. Brown writes in her nomination, the Princeton Music Boosters are deserving of special recognition because they have been a financial and advocacy force since 1957. They are celebrating 65 years this year with a special day, February 11th, as you already mentioned, to highlight their achievements, their advocacy, and their history of the organization. So tonight is but an announcement of the award. Well, it was going to be a surprise, but that's all right. The official award ceremony will take place at the 2023 OMEA Professional Development Conference on Saturday, February 4th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. in the Union Station Ballroom of the Greater Columbus Convention Center. And so to Tom and to the officers and all the volunteers of the Princeton Music Boosters, congratulations on this honor, and thank you for your 65 years of service to music in your community, and thank you very much. Nothing special tonight, other than these are your further instructions. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Go ahead, Tom.
Directions how to get to Columbus, I hope?
Yeah, directions 71.
North. Got it. All right. Mr. Stevens, thank you so much for traveling down here from Columbus. We certainly appreciate it. We don't do this for the recognition, of course, but it is nice to get recognized for all our hard work. But I think it's safe to say that the Princeton Music Boosters are probably the oldest support group here in Princeton, as we literally have been here since day one and since 1957, 58 at the school's inception. Princeton's music is Princeton's mission, rather, is pretty simple: to prepare our Vikings for college, career, and life success. And honestly, that's pretty much our mission. Countless studies and thousands of hours of research have repeatedly shown that students that participate in music achieve higher, think differently, have improved cognitive skills, enhanced social skills, and are just generally more confident. Combine that with all that Princeton has to offer, better known as the Princeton Advantage, and together we create amazing young people who are ready to take on the world. In 1 month, we'll gather to celebrate the 65 years of Princeton music, but in reality, or the Princeton Music Boosters. In reality, it's a celebration of Princeton and, of course, Princeton music. Without either one of those, the boosters wouldn't exist. So on behalf of the entire Music Booster membership, past officers and presidents, I thank you, the board members, for your continued support. Mr. Burton, of course, for yours, and all the administration. And Mr. Stevens, again, for coming down, the Ohio Music Education Association, for all you do in Ohio.
Mr. Benjamin, Mr. Stevens, and all the music staff, you could come up here with the Board of Education. Let's take a picture in celebration. That's the fourth, what time did you say it was?
Yes, right. What? Oh. I don't know why.
Maybe I don't see it like that.
Oh, wow, Bash.
February 11th.
Yeah, yeah.
My celebrity is being her mother.
Well, that means you did something good.
School recognition month.
School board recognition.
Okay, that's 11.
See it.
C, 4C.
Thank you. Next is School Board Recognition Month.
Thank you, President Wider. You know, being in education for such a long time, you know that there are many jobs that are very, very challenging and really kind of push us to do more and be more. And one of the most selfless jobs there is in education is to serve on a board where you don't make much money. You certainly get tons of phone calls.
We make money? Sorry.
I think, listen, I, on behalf of the boosters, thank you so much for all of you donating the little money you guys get to the boosters. I think that's awesome. Boosters aren't here to verify that, but Ann is. But you know, it really is a challenging, unique opportunity to serve the community, and being elected to represent an unbelievable set of communities, if you will, making one Viking community is just amazing. And each year there's a resolution that's sent from, that I like to read, that's sent from OSBA, but whereas more than 700 boards of education oversee and manage the personnel and properties of school districts throughout Ohio, and whereas the school board members are elected to establish the policies that provide the framework for their schools, and whereas school board members devote hours of their time each week to provide leadership to their local schools, and whereas school boards fill an important role with members creating and monitoring district plans to make sure students have the tools and skills to reach their full potential. And whereas school boards maintain communications with all segments of their communities to keep the public informed of district activities, and whereas school board members advocate for the best interests of the students served in their districts, and whereas it is important that communities support school boards so that students receive the best education and are prepared to be the leaders of tomorrow. And now let it be resolved that we, Mike DeWine and John Husted, Governor and Lieutenant Governor of the State of Ohio, do hereby recognize January as School Board Recognition Month on this first day of January 2023. Let's give the Board of Education a big round of applause. And, you know, I love my infomercials. There's more. Just wait. There's more coming. The January 23rd meeting, there'll be a couple different presentations for the Board of Education.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for what you guys do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is executive session. I move we go into executive session to discuss under section 121.22G1 to consider the employment and compensation of a public employee of the Ohio Revised Code.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wider?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll be back. two.
Took us 2 minutes extra.
Never mind.
Are you going to second?
Second. What she do?
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Motion passes. Next is the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Thank you. District business, approval of the 2023 tax budget.
I move to approve the 2023 tax budget as presented.
Second.
Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Thank you. All yeses. Next is approval of resolution for the advance payment of taxes.
I move to approve the resolution for the advanced payment of taxes as presented.
Second. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes, all passed. Next is the approval of the November 2022 financial and investment report.
I move to approve the November 2022 financial and investment report as presented.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just a couple.
Oh, okay.
Just a couple quick hits. So this November report is the first report with your totals from the forecast on it. So immediately when you look at the first page, you can see that right now we're showing a possible change of 390,000. So you know that it's a very small number. So just, again, we track that as we move through the fiscal year. A couple of the things that might stick out that as you review the report, the state revenue comparing this year through November, last year through November, you'll see a larger change there. Remember last November, they were still putting the fair funding formula in place and it was phasing in. So of course this year we're set, we're getting our full payments as we go. But you'll see a larger difference in the year over year. And then on expenditures, again, you'll see some differences in purchase services and the other expenses, which includes supplies, materials. Those are typically timing things, and we haven't cut any of those items or anything. So it's a timing of when we are making payments. And that's for that. We have your 018 report. We're probably going to start using this fund in January. The other 014 fund is almost at a zero. We should have no problem reaching that zero by the end of this fiscal year, just cleaning up some of the items. We will follow new board policy on expenditures from the 018 from the donation fund. COVID dollars, again, plugging right along on ESSER 2 at 97.9% either spent or encumbered. That's $126,000 remaining. The challenge is, spending those last few amounts. I mean, getting the purchase orders in place, getting invoices for the amounts of the purchase orders, just hoping that we can get all that spent. This one has to be spent and reported out by September, the end of September. ESSER 3 at 58% spent or encumbered. We have this year and next year to spend that one down. But good progress made on all fronts by the team. That's that's the financial report.
Have we seen any increase in rates based on the inflation, based on what the central bank has decided to do? Has that affected us in a positive or negative way?
Our interest rate on savings is definitely increasing.
Right.
We're not doing any new borrowing, so we don't have to worry about higher interest rates for debt
Right.
or anything like that. We are seeing higher prices in some areas, paper products, fuel. We did put a little bit of an increase in our forecast to adjust for that and just watch how this inflation settles or not. We'll just have to watch that as we move through the year. But we did anticipate some increases in those areas when we forecasted.
Susan,
Call it.
can you do it? Because
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Next is approval of overnight out-of-state field trips for Princeton debate and athletic teams.
I move to approve. Oh, okay. I move to approve the overnight out-of-state field trips for Princeton debate and athletic teams as presented.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just that, I've talked to our athletic director, Joe Roberts, regarding the track team finding perhaps a closer track meet than the one in Texas, as well as the boys basketball team, the out-of-state one that they participated in December in Florida, just as a way to maybe kind of be a little bit more attuned to what's going on with the families. We did get some feedback from families over the break about going. It's great that the kids don't miss school, but it's also something too. We had a couple boys basketball players that did not go on the trip because of the holidays. So really trying to be a little bit more cognizant of that. But all these funds for the athletic teams are raised outside of school. So that's positive. Also, it's positive when they don't miss school, but ultimately we want to be cognizant of the parents as well and the families.
Any other questions? Discussion points?
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Thank you. What's next? First reading.
Discussion items?
The school calendar.
Yeah, just the first reading, you'll see there with the calendar dates. There was great collaboration. Dr. Phillips and her team met with the calendar team. They processed this with the different associations, and ultimately, the biggest change is starting the school year a little bit later for the families. So when you look there on the optional work day is that 10th. Friday would be the first day for teachers. And we would have professional development on the 14th, and then the 15th is when the first day for students would be. And so this last year, it was the week before. So it's a little bit later. And then the only other really change for that you guys 100% would want to know about would be over Christmas, and or over winter break, excuse me. And coming out on the 21st, and then going back on the 3rd for professional development, no students. So, last couple of years, you've had 3 full weekends, but that would be a change for next year. And everybody seemed to be very excited about that, more time for, with students in school.
They were more excited about kids in school than 3 weekends?
Yeah.
Is that
and-
your
Yeah, yes,
testimony?
yes. And so when you look at the high school, there's 3 days for final exams. So that kind of is really smooth week there, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so, yep.
And when you say everybody, can you,
The committee,
everybody in the
the
committee?
teachers that were on it, the input that we got from associations, as well as our building principals and central office.
Okay, just curiously, because I'm looking beyond that. So, December, okay, never mind. Okay. I was just trying to understand. Never mind. I get it.
Just with that, with the talk of exams, I know this year there was one day where the kids had 3 exams on one day. And I don't know if, you just mentioned 3 days for exam. I don't know if you could consider starting exams on the Friday. Or if they were gonna build in that extra day at the end to have makeup exams. But I know for some of the kids that was a lot.
Yeah, the exam schedule hasn't been finalized. I just know that
Yeah.
from typically the 3 days, but
Yeah.
it may be that Friday would be a couple of them, because they tried some things a little bit differently this year. So I think they're evaluating that, and then they'll make a determination in the fall.
They come back Thursday. Okay.
Is
And
there-
then on May 19th, that's the tentative.
Yeah,
That's tentative graduation date. UC doesn't even begin looking at that. Libby, when is that? When do they start looking at that, the commencement date? In January, so the mid-January or so? Okay.
Is that Mother's Day again?
No.
Okay, good.
Every day should
Every
be
day is
Mother's Day, as
we
we
know
know.
that,
Yes.
right. But,
Yes.
last year it seemed like it was on Mother's Day.
Is there anything else? About the calendar? We have a letter. It says, "Dear Board, on behalf of the Sycamore Community Band, we would like to thank you for your support since April 2021. We have been working with Kristen Brown and the music department of Princeton for our rehearsals. If not for Princeton, we would not have been able to get together and perform. Our band felt welcomed, comfortable, and safe. We enjoyed the combined concert with your high school musicians. Mrs. Brown is an excellent director, and we are so happy to have crossed paths with her. As we now return to our regular practice facilities, we will always be grateful to the Princeton City School District. Go Vikes." And this is from Sue Warren, I think it is, and that's their music group president.
I'm just curious, what had happened
Can
to
you-
their facility?
Can you give us some background, Tom?
Yes, they couldn't practice at Sycamore, so they practiced at Princeton. And give John Fricky a lot of credit, because I know we had to move some things around to make that happen. So their facilities, I think it was with the construction that they had there, with the pool and all that. I don't know if the pool going the wrong way, if that had an impact on it or not, but I know they had some struggles there. So I know their swim team as well as their water polo team, we also accommodated them, but they actually are reimbursing us for some of that. The reason why we didn't, we made this available for the community band is because we already had staff on site. We didn't have to hire anybody. The cleaning was the same. Yep,
It's a good neighbor policy.
good neighbor policy.
Always. Princeton always does.
Well, with some neighbors. Mr. Simons, I can't believe you said that on television. That was crazy. No, listen, I take full responsibility, Susan.
I didn't say a word. So you don't need to take responsibility. I'm just saying. Is there anything else for the good of the cause?
Treasurer's report and superintendent report.
Treasurer's report and superintendent's report.
I gave you each an audit report. Our audit is complete and filed at the end of the calendar year. It was a very interesting, very compact audit. We worked like crazy for 4 weeks. I mean, everyone, all these people and their teams really did push information back to us, and we had really, really short turnarounds. We had great results. Nothing, no findings, no citations, no management letter comments, all very, very good audit. There were a couple verbal items that were discussed, and those are just items that the auditors talk with you about. They'd like to see you make those changes for the next year. They will check on them. We will make the changes. And so those are all detailed right in that report for you. But all in all, great, great audit. The applications for the awards were all filed on time, so I was really anxious that we were going to have to extend the deadline as things were getting a little closer on New Year's Eve, but they got it across the finish line, so that was a really good thing. So that's what we have for that. Again, I'm going to remind you, I need to know when you're going, if you're going to go just the regular conference or if you're going to the conference the day ahead. I have a couple weeks to continue to pick on you and bother you about that. At the work session, I'll probably ask for a commitment. The early bird deadline is the 28th, so we'd like to hit that with as many registrations as possible. And then you all have this copy. Mary forwarded it in an email to everyone, and so I printed it out so you could each have a copy of that for your effective board award.
Well,
Okay.
I hope we proceed with that award. Who fills that out? Who's going to do that?
You,
Okay. Where is it?
didn't see the OSBA liaison?
Did you say so?
That's what we're going for.
I don't know.
Well, I think it's great to apply for that. And congratulations on a good audit. I'll work with you.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll apply for that.
We'd be glad to help, too.
Oh, I don't know.
That's all I have. Okay.
Okay, just very, very quickly, we've had really lengthy discussions about ESSER funds as well as ARP funds today at the Leadership Academy. Everybody kind of heard the same thing that we've been talking about at Cabinet, making sure that we, a couple different lists that we have. You know, I made a promise that before I transition that I'll have a full list and recommendations for which positions we really need to keep. I mean, ultimately, every one of those positions that was hired through ESSER funds knew that it was ESSER funds. Those run out. But the reality is that when you look at some of the positions based upon need, we can't eliminate them. There's no way we'd be able to do that. But we'll be looking at that. We're looking at two different things. One is position, the other's obviously people, right? So any way that we can move people around through attrition, that'd be the best way to do it. So we don't have to get to a point down the line where there's conversations about riffing. We do know that we're really being very diligent with taxpayers' dollars. And prior to COVID and ESSER dollars and ARP dollars, we did a phenomenal job. We would have pushed any conversation of levy really down the road. So the ESSER and ARP dollars really kind of helped address some of the issues that they intended to. But ultimately, we do know that we really need to look at all the expenditures. As you know, the 5-year forecast does not have certain things in them, specifically all those ESSER positions. That's not in the 5-year forecast. Those are not in the 5-year forecast. When you look at the supplanted positions, those already are in the 5-year forecast. So myself, Chris, Tom Cindre. We've looked at those lists. I'm going to meet with Kevin in greater detail, but I've talked to him about that. We're going to talk with the whole team and really have this deep conversation about what we can and what we can't move forward with. An example, quick, easy example, back in pre-COVID, we had 10 people that were school nurses, health aide, health specialists. We had 10 in the district. Right now, we have 15. Now, we made a commitment to make sure that we had a full-time person in every building, but we know that some buildings are smaller than others, so we've already started to look at that attrition. We have the health aide over at Sharonville Elementary School. She's actually going back to school, actually wonderful program, great for her. She's phenomenal. Hopefully she'll go get her RN and come right back to us down the line. But ultimately that position, we're going to look to move somebody in there. The same thing holds true for some para positions, and every single move that we make now is going to help down the line, because again, we could fully fund everything next year as well. We can do that, but we really need to be cognizant of down the line. So we're looking at really kind of making a bunch of different moves. Kevin, we had a couple paras and at least one health aide or health specialist. Is that accurate? Okay. So, and we've talked to some of the, many administrators about, because when we get a form, they fill out a form, a posting form. It goes to Kevin first, Director of HR. If he approves it, then it comes to me. If he denies it, then it comes to me. If he denies it, 100% of the time I deny it as well. If he approves it, I'd say the vast majority of the time I approve it as well, although sometimes we have conversations. So that's a really big conversation piece. Tomorrow, as a reminder, we have our CCP, College Credit Plus, Zoom meeting at 6 p.m. Please see all the, I mean, it's been really blasted all over the place, so please make sure that's mandatory to participate in CCP. Mrs. Roddy, do you mind sending out information to the board just in case you want to tune in to that? That'd be great. Also a reminder, Wednesday we have our Teacher in Service Day for elementary staff. No school next Monday. We have negotiations that will be coming up soon, February, and you know we always start with PACE, and Susan Wider is representative, so we'll be working on calendars with the president of the association, Mr. Lonnie Douche, who's out in the audience right now. We have a lot of different things coming up. The Music Booster Bash is the 11th. Let me know if you guys want to go. The gala is March 11th at the Delta Hotel, 5:30 to 9:30-ish. And we have legislative breakfasts that happen, I would say, every other month. And different organizations. And last Friday, we had a legislative breakfast. And it was Representative Seitz, Senator Wilson, there were a couple other legislators that were there as well, and had really deep embedded conversations around one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life, and that's the deferment and the penalties that we get when we do the right thing by federal laws, and we defer those students who have been identified with special needs through the federally protected individualized education plan program. And looking specifically at that, we pull together, it's the greatest collaboration we have in all of education, when you have parents and kids and teachers and staff and everybody together, and you do the right thing and you defer their graduation. Finally, there's a lot of movement to either do a waiver with the federal government or whatever, so it would not impact our district or any other district in the state of Ohio if you defer graduation, which is what we should do. And never one time have we ever backed off of that. For sure in my, albeit brief tenure as superintendent, but have I ever one time said we should not defer anybody? No way. We will always do the right thing by kids. Now, next year, we're going to get 1 star on graduation rate. We're going to get 1 star as a district. We were 1 student away from meeting the indicator. But we did the right thing by kids. And we could have gone back. We could have tried to manipulate, but that's wrong. When I said that to Representative Seitz, he was floored. And I already know Senator Blessing is on the side of that, and Senator Wilson couldn't believe it as well. So hopefully there's be some great movement with that. And lastly, wanted to, in case you guys didn't get a chance to welcome Patty Fong. Patty, if you could wave. She's our new EMIS director and has done a great job. Patty, usually at this time we just want to call you up and have you sing your alma mater. But because it's the time, it's national championship game, we'll forego that tonight. That is all for my report.
What's the alma mater? No.
I just said alma mater. I had no idea what the heck I was.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not from here.
Neither am I.
Exactly.
All right, well, thank you, and go Bucks.
Yeah. What?
About a week, 10 days.
You should have been playing.
I just gotta give a compliment to that College Credit Plus program. I think it's just so outstanding, and I wish it had been around when I was in high school here. But I just constantly know of 2 or 3 families now whose children graduated from Princeton with enough credits to be sophomores when they entered college. So that's a great program.
Yeah, and Gina, real quick, I know I've talked with Mrs. Stiles about really trying to delineate what specifically is needed to be able to graduate with an associate's degree before college. So there's a lot of moving parts of that, but just to let you know, we're doing that. And I know Chris forwarded you information on the cost of that, and it's really insignificant, I think, when you look at the value that we provide.
Right. That's wonderful. That's good news.
Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Are we going into executive session?
Are we? Do we need it?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Thank you, Gina. I'll second it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was like ready.
Mr. Simons?
Switching it up, Carol.
Yes. Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wider?
Yes.
See, I'm afraid of making too many motions in one night.
Oh,
So I
stop.
try to give somebody else